In 1985, a guy named Robert worked at a hardware store, making about $20,000 a year. That same year, he bought a three-bedroom house for $90,000. It took him about 4.5 years of income to buy that home. Today, his granddaughter Emily makes $65,000 a year. She works harder than Robert ever did. She has a college degree he never needed, and she still lives with 3 roommates because a similar house near her now costs $420,000. That's more than 6 years of her entire income, and that's before taxes, insurance, or a single dollar of interest. Same family, same work ethic, same dream, completely different reality. So here's the question that's going to bother you for the rest of this video. Did Emily make worse choices than Robert? Is she lazier? Does she waste more money on coffee and avocado toast, like everyone loves to joke about? Or is something much bigger going on? Something most people never actually stop to understand. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to see money, houses, and the entire idea of the American dream a little differently. Let's start with the story almost everyone believes. You've probably heard some version of this. Young people today just don't want to work hard. They spend too much on takeout, streaming subscriptions, vacations, and fancy phones. If they just cut back, saved harder, and stopped being impatient, they could afford a home just like their parents did. It sounds reasonable. It's simple. It fits neatly into a sentence, and it's almost completely wrong. Here's why that story falls apart the moment you look at actual numbers instead of assumptions. Since 1985, average home prices in the United States have gone up by roughly 6 times, not double, not triple, 6 times. Wages, on the other hand, have gone up by less than 3 times in that same period. Read that again slowly, because this single gap is the entire story of why homeownership feels impossible now. Homes got 6 times more expensive. Paychecks got less than 3 times bigger. The math simply stopped working, no matter how much avocado toast you skip. Let's make this even easier to picture. Imagine you're playing a video game where the goal is to reach the finish line. In 1985, the finish line was 100 steps away, and each year, you could take about 20 steps forward. You'd reach it in 5 years. Today, the finish line has been moved back to 600 steps away, but your legs only got a little bit longer. You can now take maybe 30 steps a year instead of 20. Sounds like progress, right? Except the finish line moved twice as fast as your legs did. That's not a discipline problem. That's not a latte problem. That's a broken race. Now let's talk about why the finish line moved so far away in the first place, because this is where the psychology gets really interesting. Houses aren't like phones or clothes. When a phone gets too expensive, people simply buy a cheaper one or wait a year. But a house isn't just a product. It's shelter, it's status, it's stability. And for most families, it's the single biggest emotional purchase of their life. That emotional weight changes how the entire market behaves. Here's the first big piece of the puzzle: supply. In many growing cities, especially the ones where jobs are booming, builders simply aren't putting up enough new homes. Zoning laws, limited land, expensive permits, and neighborhood pushback all slow down construction. When more people want homes than there are homes available, prices don't rise gently. They rise sharply because buyers start competing against each other. This is where a psychological trigger kicks in that economists call scarcity bias. When people believe something is limited, they don't just want it more, they panic about missing out entirely. You've felt this before in smaller ways. Think about a sale that says, "Only 2 left in stock." Suddenly, that item feels more valuable, even if nothing about the product itself changed. Now imagine that same panic, except the product is a house, the stakes are your entire future, and there are 10 other buyers standing right next to you at the open house. That panic pushes people to offer more than they can comfortably afford, just to not lose out. The second piece of the puzzle is money itself, specifically interest rates. For years, borrowing money was incredibly cheap. When interest rates are low, monthly payments on a loan are lower too, so buyers can technically afford a bigger loan for the same monthly payment. Sounds great for buyers, right? Except sellers know this too. When everyone can suddenly borrow more, sellers simply raise their prices to match what buyers can now pay. The cheap money didn't make houses more affordable. It just gave buyers a bigger number to spend, and prices absorbed that extra spending power completely. This leads to a psychological pattern called anchoring. Once a neighborhood sells one house for a high price, every future buyer and seller mentally anchors to that number. Nobody wants to sell for less than their neighbor got, and buyers start believing that price is simply normal even if it isn't. Prices don't just reflect what a house is worth. They reflect what people believe other people are willing to pay. Now let's bring in the third piece, and this one hits closer to home than most people realize: how we're taught to think about money itself. Robert's generation grew up with a simple formula: get a stable job, save a portion of your paycheck, buy a house, and let time do the rest. That formula worked beautifully when home prices grew slowly and paychecks kept pace. But somewhere along the way, that formula broke, and a lot of people are still trying to follow instructions for a game that changed its rules. Here's a psychological concept that explains a lot of frustration people feel today. It's called the reference point trap. Our brains don't judge whether something is affordable in isolation. We judge it by comparing it to a reference point, usually what our parents had, or what we expected life to look like by a certain age. When reality falls short of that reference point, our brain doesn't just register disappointment, it registers failure, even when the failure isn't personal at all. It's structural. This is why so many people in their late 20s and 30s feel like they're doing something wrong, even when they're saving diligently, working full-time, and making smart choices. Their brain is comparing their progress to a reference point built in a completely different economy. Let's also talk about something rarely mentioned in these conversations: the hidden cost of simply being alive today. Health insurance, childcare, transportation, education, and basic groceries have all climbed steadily. Even if your paycheck goes up every year, more of it disappears before you ever get the chance to save it. Saving for a house isn't just about cutting small expenses anymore. It's about competing against an entire economy that quietly demands more from every single paycheck before savings even begin. So if the odds are genuinely different now, does that mean homeownership is simply impossible for most people? Not exactly, but it does mean the old playbook needs a serious update. Here's the deeper insight this video is really building toward. Wealth building was never actually about the house itself. The house was always just one possible vehicle for building wealth, not the only one, and definitely not the most important one. For decades, real estate looked like the obvious path because it was the vehicle available to most families. But building wealth actually comes down to one core idea: consistently putting money into assets that grow over time and giving that growth as many years as possible to compound. A house can do that, but so can other things, and sometimes with far less pressure and far more flexibility. Think of wealth building like planting different types of trees. A house is one type of tree, a big one, slow growing, and it needs a huge upfront investment of soil and water before it gives you any shade. But there are other trees too: retirement accounts, index funds, small consistent investments made early and left alone for years. These trees grow quietly in the background while you focus on your career, your skills, and your income. The real trap isn't that people can't afford a house. The real trap is believing that if you can't buy a house right now, you're failing at building wealth altogether. That belief causes people to either give up on saving entirely or throw every dollar toward a down payment goal that keeps moving further away, while ignoring other forms of growth that are available to them right now, today, with far less money required to start. So what should you actually take away from all of this? First, understand that if buying a house feels harder than it did for your parents or grandparents, that's not a personal failure. That's a measurable shift in the relationship between wages and home prices, and pretending otherwise only adds guilt on top of an already difficult situation. Second, separate the emotional goal of owning a home from the practical goal of building wealth. You can absolutely still work toward homeownership, but it doesn't have to be the only place your money grows while you wait. Even small, consistent investments started early can grow significantly over time, simply because time itself is one of the most powerful forces in wealth building. Third, pay attention to reference points. Stop measuring your financial life against a version of the economy that no longer exists. Measure your progress against your own starting point, your own income, and your own timeline. And finally, understand this: the goal was never really the house. The goal was always financial security, freedom, and stability. A house is one way to get there, but it is not the only way.